What if the most dangerous, most powerful version of a woman is the one who chooses to walk alone? For years society has told women a single story, that their worth is measured by who chooses them, that their value rises only when a man enters their life, that their purpose begins the moment they are claimed. Women were taught to fear silence, fear emptiness, fear solitude, as if being alone made them incomplete, undesirable, defective. But a shift has begun. Quiet at first, now unstoppable. Women are making a choice that terrifies both society and the men who once depended on their need for companionship. They are choosing themselves. Not accidentally, not out of bitterness, not because they can't find someone, but because they're discovering a truth the world never wanted them to know. A woman alone is not broken. A woman alone is free. Free from expectations. Free from performance. Free from the constant emotional labor demanded of her since girlhood. Free from the pressure to shrink herself so a man can feel bigger, louder, stronger. For the first time in generations, women are stepping into solitude not as a punishment, but as a sanctuary. And what they're finding there is nothing short of revolutionary. Because solitude for a woman is not quiet. It is loud. It is revealing. It is confrontational. It is transformative. Her solitude is where she meets the version of herself she spent years abandoning. The wild one, the intuitive one, the creative one, the one who felt too big for the world that tried to tame her. And here's what no one tells you. A woman doesn't choose to be single because she hates men. She chooses it because she finally loves peace more than validation. She chooses it because she's seen what happens when she builds her life around someone who was never strong enough to hold it. She chooses it because she's learned that loneliness inside a relationship cuts far deeper than any loneliness she's ever felt on her own. It starts with exhaustion, the quiet kind. The exhaustion of being the emotional caretaker, the therapist, the motivator, the stabilizer, the peacekeeper. Roles she never applied for, never wanted, but learned to play because the world told her it was normal. She carried relationships that should have been carried with her. She held men together while no one held her. She fixed what wasn't hers to fix, softened herself to be easier, forgave what she never should have tolerated. And then one day she breaks, but not the way everyone expects. Not loudly, not dramatically, not in tears. She breaks into clarity. She realizes she is tired of building men who can't build themselves. Tired of offering softness to people who only understand it as weakness. Tired of carrying a weight that never belonged to her. And so she steps away, slowly at first, then completely. That moment, the moment she chooses solitude over performance, is the moment her power returns. Because when a woman stops begging to be chosen, she becomes the one who chooses. When she stops fighting to be understood, she finally understands herself. When she stops offering pieces of herself to fill the empty spaces in others, she fills her own. That is when her solitude transforms from silence into strength, from emptiness into expansion, from fear into freedom. The world calls it loneliness, but she knows better. She knows she's entering a chapter where her life is no longer something that happens to her. It is something she creates. But the true power of a single woman reveals itself in the next stage, when solitude stops being a retreat from pain and becomes the birthplace of identity. The real transformation begins when a woman discovers the truth no one warned her about. Solitude reveals the life she was never allowed to live. And this truth hits her first in the most unexpected places. In her mornings. For the first time in years, she wakes up in a quiet room where no one needs anything from her. No emotional caretaking. No forced smiles. No pretending. Just her breath, her thoughts, her pace. And she realizes something shocking. She was never actually tired of love. She was tired of constantly being responsible for it. When a woman chooses to be single, she begins to see all the tiny sacrifices she made in every past relationship. Not the big ones. Society loves to glorify those. The small ones. The micro-deaths of self. Like the foods she stopped eating because he didn't like them. The clothes she stopped wearing because he felt insecure. The dreams she delayed because he wasn't ready. The silence she learned to swallow because he wasn't in the mood. Solitude exposes these things like a black light on stained walls. And suddenly, she's not just living alone. She's living as herself for the first time in a decade. White heavy checkmark 1. Solitude gives women back their time. The most underrated superpower. Ask a grown woman what she wants most, truly wants, and she won't say diamonds, or status, or romance. She'll say time. And not the scraps of time squeezed between responsibilities. Real time. Uninterrupted. Unclaimed. Sacred. The world doesn't realize how much time women lose in relationships. Hours of emotional processing. Hours of fixing what he broke emotionally. Hours of worrying, soothing, supporting, explaining. A woman in a relationship often becomes everyone's emotional backbone, except her own. But a woman alone? She becomes the architect of her entire day. She reads more. She thinks deeper. She learns her rhythms. When she's most creative, most calm, most alive, she feels something she hasn't felt since childhood. Freedom without apology. And this is where the real danger begins. Because once a woman tastes this type of freedom, she stops returning to men who drain her. She stops accepting relationships that rob her of her time and replace it with stress disguised as love. She stops negotiating for the bare minimum. White heavy checkmark 2. Solitude helps women rebuild their identity after years of shrinking themselves. Every woman has a story she never told out loud. The relationship where she became smaller to make the other person seem bigger. She remembers the criticism she called concern. She remembers the jealousy she called love. She remembers the emotional chaos she called passion. She remembers how she abandoned herself little by little to keep the peace, to avoid arguments, to make the relationship work. But in the quiet space of her own company, the truth finally speaks. She wasn't hard to love. She was just loving people who didn't know what to do with a powerful woman. And now that she's alone, she begins to rebuild all the pieces she lost along the way. A woman in solitude paints again. She travels alone for the first time. She goes to a restaurant with a book instead of a companion. She picks hobbies based on desire, not approval. She decorates her home the way she always imagined. Not minimalistic for him, not practical for children, but expressive in ways that finally feel like her. And the most dangerous part? She begins to enjoy her own company. She laughs alone. She dances in her kitchen. She stops waiting for external permission to live a beautiful life. Her solitude becomes a mirror, showing her the version of herself she abandoned. Strong, intuitive, creative, fearless. But the next transformation, the one that happens after identity and time return, is the part that scares society the most. It's where a woman realizes she doesn't need to choose between love and freedom, because her solitude has taught her the rarest superpower of all: discernment. The third transformation begins quietly, not with fireworks, not with some dramatic revelation, but with a simple, terrifying truth. Once a woman becomes whole alone, she stops tolerating half-love from anyone. And this is where everything around her starts to shift. Because when she finally builds resilience in solitude, when she reclaims her time, when she rediscovers her identity, something extraordinary awakens inside her, a level of discernment that makes average men tremble. And emotionally unavailable men run for the exit. White heavy checkmark 1. Solitude teaches women the difference between love and attachment. There is a story almost every grown woman knows. She once stayed with a man because she was afraid of being alone. She mistook the butterflies for love, the inconsistency for passion, the anxiety for chemistry. Thought, if I just love him harder, he'll change. If I just stay patient, he'll grow. If I just shrink a little more, maybe he'll finally see me. But solitude breaks that illusion. When she sits with her thoughts long enough, when she stops running from herself, she realizes something brutal. She wasn't afraid of losing him. She was afraid of facing herself. This understanding changes everything. Because when a woman finally experiences real peace alone, She stops craving emotional chaos. She stops romanticizing inconsistency. She no longer mistakes attention for affection or intimacy for investment. She begins to know deeply what her nervous system feels like when it's not constantly under threat. And a woman who knows peace can no longer be seduced by a man who only knows how to offer adrenaline. Her standard shifts permanently. White heavy checkmark 2. Solitude gives women a supernatural BS detector. There's a moment every woman remembers. A man she once would have given months of her life to approaches her again. Same charm, same tricks, same sweet promises. But this time, she feels nothing. Not because she's bitter. Not because she's cold. Not because she hates men. Because she can see him clearly. Before Solitude, she saw potential. After Solitude, she sees patterns. She hears the tone beneath the words. She notices the inconsistency in his actions. She catches manipulation in moments most people overlook. A delayed text, a vague excuse, a sudden change in mood. She reads it all instantly. Solitude sharpens her intuition like a blade. And it scares people who benefited from her confusion. Because now she doesn't ask, will he change? She asks, why did I ever accept this? And the answer is always the same. Because she didn't know her worth. But she knows it now. White heavy checkmark 3. Solitude makes women attract a completely different type of love. There is a hidden, almost mystical law. When a woman no longer needs love, she becomes the kind of woman the right kind of man fights to earn. People think solitude makes women hard to get. But that's not true. It makes them hard to manipulate, hard to rush, hard to impress with shallow things, hard to distract with fake promises. Before, she was looking for connection. Now, she is filtering for compatibility. She stops accepting men who are unsure. She stops waiting for men who are inconsistent. She stops entertaining men who lack emotional maturity. Instead, she becomes magnetic to a different kind of partner, kind who respects time, values peace, loves deeply, and doesn't fear emotional responsibility. The kind of man who doesn't want to possess her, but to stand beside her. The kind of man who isn't intimidated by her strength, but inspired by it. The kind of man who sees her solitude not as a threat, but as evidence of her emotional wealth. And this is the twist no one expects. Solitude doesn't make a woman avoid relationships. It makes her ready for the right one. White heavy checkmark 4. Solitude gives women their final superpower, emotional independence. When she no longer fears being alone, she becomes impossible to control. Not in a rebellious way. Not in a toxic way. In a grounded, powerful, spiritual way. She no longer begs for attention. She no longer chases messages. She no longer twists herself into knots to be chosen. She knows something most people never learn. Love is beautiful, but peace is essential. And she will never trade peace for partnership again. She enters relationships with full heart, but zero desperation. She can walk away the moment her soul feels dishonored. She can detach from situations that no longer serve her. She can choose herself without guilt. This is the woman society fears. Because you can't break a woman who finally understands she doesn't need anyone to save her. And that's the hidden benefit of women choosing solitude. They don't become alone. They become whole.